This took so long to make. Hello and welcome back. We are reaching the end of 2025 and this year has been a very experimental year for me when it comes to my art practice, because I was doing a lot of testing things, experimenting with things to try and understand how I can make a watercolor system for me that works really well for my needs. And that includes how I use the watercolors, how I organize them, how I store them. And over the course of the last 12 months, I have found out a lot about myself and a lot about what works and what doesn't for me. And as a result, I have changed a lot to do with my main watercolor palette. And yes, for those of you who recognize this palette from earlier in the year, this is my main palette now. So we're going to be touring my main palette and I'm going to talk about my pigment choices, the classics, the new pigments, what I'm doing with this, why I have picked these pigments in here. But I'm also going to talk about why this system works for me in my current art practice. And before we dive in, because I know people will ask, this is the Holbein watercolor palette from the RP series, and this is the 24 well version. There is a larger palette than this, but I prefer to keep my palettes on the smaller end. So this is as large as I am happy going, and that is for a couple of reasons. One is because I do not have a lot of desk space. This that you're seeing here, the mixing chart, is resting against my drawing tablet, which starts here. So my drawing tablet is there, and then I only have desk space until just off screen. So I do not have a lot of desk space at the moment. And that means that this actually overhangs just a tiny bit by about that much. So I don't have a lot of desk space. That's one reason. Another reason why I don't like going larger than this is because this is still a reasonable size for me to be able to take outside. I do have a dedicated travel palette, which is this one, but this is still possible for me to take out and about, and I have done that before, back in spring when this was my expansion palette. So I've left it in its messy form because, one, I didn't want to clean it. Two, I wanted to show you as it actually gets used. So up here we have some of the colour mixes from a video I did a few weeks ago, I can't remember now, but I've mainly been painting out of this side the last couple weeks and just cleaning out this side. Eventually I'll end up doing a larger painting where I want to clean the whole thing, but for now I've just been cleaning this one. These paint puddles are from a secret Santa that I did of someone's pet, and they should have received that by now. So the main reason why this ended up becoming my main palette is because I love using slanted wells, and these can be removed and moved around just like half pans, full pans can on that kind of palette. So I get the best of both worlds. I get to use the type of well that I enjoy the most, and I can still move them around easily. So originally this palette I brought in spring in order to basically be a place for me to store my other colours that weren't on my main palette. And I ended up just loving using this palette. And I'll go into detail about why I use this palette later, because I feel like some people are probably going to want to know more about the colours first. So we'll get into the colours. Then I'll talk about why I'm using this specific palette. So this is the colour chart that I made. I'm going to put a scan of it up on screen, and I will also timestamp this scan on screen for you so that it's easily referenced. You can go back and look at this section to look at the chart, but if you would like to have the chart up on your phone or a second screen or whatever while watching this video, I will have a blog post linked in the description, which will have the scan of this on it. And then if you would like to have the high resolution scan and be able to download the high resolution scan for yourself, that will be available for free on Patreon, and that will also be in the description. So with all of that said and done, this chart took so long. It took so long to paint. It was a test of patience for me, but I do find these charts beneficial to do very, very infrequently. This would be a kind of chart that I would do every few years when I've had a major change to my palette, which I have this year. So for me, it felt like time. It was time to do this. Most of the time, the way that I like to do mixing charts is I like to have one colour and then another colour, and then gradually, in steps, mix them together so that I can see a range of mixes between two pigments, whereas this is a little bit more restricted because you only have like a mass tone and then a tint of two pigments interacting, and you don't get to see the full range between the two of them. But there is a place for this kind of chart. We're going to look first at the yellows. So the diagonal row you see here are the actual pigments in the palette. And what I've done is I've put their name and then their pigment number across the top. And we're going to start with the yellows. So first we have PY150, which is nickel azo yellow, and that is this pigment here. This is a classic colour for me. So some of these colours are classics that I always try and have in my palette because I just love them. They work really well for me, and this is one of them. But this particular kind of nickel azo yellow is new to me. So I've been using Senneliers, which is called Yellow Lake, for a few years now. I think it was the first PY150 I tried actually. But earlier in the year, my friend Heidi sent me some core paints, and this was one of the ones that she sent me. Prior to that, I had never tried core before, and so she very kindly sent me some to try. And for that reason, I've got the core version of Nickel Azo Yellow there. And next up we have PO62. This is a pigment that is newer to me, but has quickly become a favourite. So this is what I basically use as a warm yellow. It's a very yellow leaning orange, especially in comparison to the other oranges that I have. And in limited palettes that I make, I'll often use this as a warm yellow because a lot of the time in colour theory, you comparatively analyse colours. So when you use a particular blue, so in a limited palette, so for example if I used Indanthrone blue, it is a very deep muted blue, but if you're using a limited palette where that is the only blue, it looks more blue when placed next to colours that aren't bright blues. And that's something that you can do with PO62. You can make it look a lot more yellow than orange depending on the other pigments you have in the limited palette. That placed next to PY150 though, it does look very orange. The next two we have here I'm going to bring out together because these two are Pyrrole Orange and Transparent Orange. So this is PO71 and PO107. These two are very similar. So for anyone who has been looking at the two and then being like, those look very similar, why are they both on the palette? Well, colours that you see a little asterisk by are colours that I am trying to figure out what I prefer through actual practice. So during this year, one thing that I've been trying to do is trying to find a replacement for my favourite warm red, which was a discontinued version of PO71 that was such a red-leaning orange that it could act as a warm red. And I've been experimenting over the course of the year to try and find something that I enjoy using that has similar qualities. It's not going to have the exact same hue, but similar qualities. And these are the two top contenders at the moment, and I love both of them. So one thing that I decided to do was put both on my main palette and see which one I would actually end up using the most and reaching for the most. So I'm going to see in practice which one ends up getting a giant hole in it developing first. And that will be what decides which one is the winner. And that means that at some point maybe I can take out one of them, maybe at the end of next year, and then I have a spot for something else. Next up we have another pigment that's new to me this year, which is PR178, which is this one here. This is a middle to cool leaning red. It's the middle red in my main palette, because again, a lot of the time colour theory is relative and depends on what you're comparing it to. And this pigment was recommended to me by Lana because I wanted to try something new. And so she recommended this pigment to me, and I have ended up loving this pigment, and I used it in some limited palettes to create illustrations this year. I will put one of those on screen. So the one that I'm putting on screen right now, that was made with only 3 pigments, and the red in that 3 pigment limited palette was this PR178, and the colour name for that is Perylene Dark Red, and it's by Schminke. I didn't mention, but the Pyrrole Orange is by My Merry Blue, and the Transparent Orange is by Winsor & Newton, and then the Aza Orange is by M. Graham. I am not brand loyal. I go wherever the colours please me. That is going to be a motto for me now. I go where the colours please me. This is another section now, these 3 here, where I'm trying to figure out what works best for me. So we have here Quinacridone Rose, and this particular one is by Core. This was also sent, no, hang on, that is incorrect. This one is by Daniel Smith. So this is the last of the Quinacridone Rose PV19 that I have from my first set of professional watercolours, which is from quite a few years ago now, and that's the very, very last of it, because for a while I was using a different PV19, and I finished using that one now, and I thought, okay, finally it's time to finish off one that's been at the bottom of the box for a while. So that is the last of that. And then I have Quinacridone Magenta, and that one is by Core, so that's PR122. That was sent to me by Heidi along with the Nicolazzo Yellow. And then we have Quinacridone Violet PV19, and that is from Schminke. So these 3, especially these 2 here, are something that I'm also trying to discover through just raw practice what I prefer. Because for a very long time I started learning with PV19. If it wants to focus, there we go. I started learning with PV19, Rose specifically, this one, and I had never used PR122 before this year. And I had also never tried the violet version of PV19 either before this year. So this year I've been in a very experimenting, trying things kind of mood. So I decided to pick up this myself, and then this was sent to me. So I want to try and figure out what I actually love, because do I love PV19 because I love it, or do I love it just because that is what I started learning with and I've never actually tried anything else? So that's something that I am also experimenting with by having them on my main palette. I could see myself maybe picking one of those 2 and keeping the PV19, because there's enough of a difference between the PV19 and these two for me to potentially keep that and one of them. But I have a feeling that one of these two is going to end up going, much like one of these two is probably going to end up going. I'll use one more than the other. Next we have Perylene Violet. This is probably my top pigment of the year. I might do a top 5 pigments of the year video. That'll be a spoiler for one of them though, because that'll be on it. If you'd be interested in a top 5 pigments, then let me know, but I'll just cover this up so you can actually see the so all of these mixes here are Perylene Violet. This is a new to me pigment as well. I picked up a tiny tube of it to try out Jackman's watercolours for the same time. That's Jackman's, not Jackson's, they're different brands. And I absolutely fell head over heels for PV29, head over heels. And I use it so much in mixing muted earthy colours. As you can see here, it makes absolutely gorgeous muted earthy colours. So that is a new staple for me, and very messy. Next up we have a rehomed pigment. So this is PV15 Ultramarine Violet by Core. So this one here. And this is a paint that one of the community members over in Lana's community was wanting to get rehomed. Cyan, who is also on YouTube, recommend her videos, was wanting to rehome a couple colours, and this was one of them, and she sent this one and also this one that we'll get to me. So these are both rehomed colours. If you ever want to, if you ever find that you don't enjoy a pigment, rehoming them is a lovely way of passing on the joy. Like something that you might not like, someone else might like. And for the reason of this being a new pigment for me, it's also being put on here because I want to see if I really enjoy using it on my main palette, or if it is a lesser used pigment for me. So if I find that after like 6 months in 2026 I'm just not touching it, then I know that it's not really like a main palette colour for me, and it would end up going on my expansion palette. Next up, however, we have these two staples for me. So we're going back to the staples. That was a lot of new colours up here. We're going back to staples now. These two are my staple warm blues. We've got Ultramarine and we've got Indanthrone Blue. So the Indanthrone that I have is PB60 and it's by Daniel Smith. And then the Ultramarine I have, which is PB29, is French Ultramarine by Schminke. I decided to switch out my Sennelier Ultramarine Deep for the Schminke French Ultramarine because I wanted a more granulating ultramarine on my main palette for the end of 2025 going into 2026. And we'll see whether I enjoy the more granulating ultramarine long term on my main palette. Otherwise, I can easily switch that one out for the Sennelier one in my expansion palette and just keep on going. So that is that side, and I'll flip you around so that you can see it a little bit better. So that is the Ultramarine and the Indanthrone Blue. Staple colours for me. Then we have a newer colour. We've got the Cobalt Blue PB28, and this is also by Core. This was, as I just mentioned, one of the rehomed paints from Cyan that she was wanting to rehome to someone else, and so I picked it up. I am new to Cobalt Blues and I've been learning about them this year, learning to use them, learning to love them. I've got a PB 28 version here, and then I also have a PB72 Cobalt Blue by Jackman's. And then we're going into the cooler blues now. We have 3 here. Well, we've got 2 cool blues here. So these 2 are, I haven't asterisked them, but these are 2 that I am kind of seeing if I want to keep both of them on my palette long term. One of them is a classic for me, which is Phthalo Blue Green Shade, this one here. Phthalo Blue Green Shade is a pigment that I love it. I don't use it as often as the warmer blues just because I find warm blues more useful in most of the paintings that I make at the moment. But when I do need a cool blue, I usually go for either phthalo blue or for a phthalo turquoise. And for a very long time, the phthalo turquoise I was using is the mixed pigment version, where it is phthalo blue PB15 mixed with phthalo green blue shade PG7. So these 2 mixed together. And this year I decided to try out turquoise green, which is also called phthalo turquoise, which is the single pigment version, PB16. So this is my first time using the single pigment version, and I want to see if I enjoy having both of these, so the phthalo blue green shade and the turquoise green on my palette. And I have a feeling that I might, just because for a very long time I have used phthalo blue green shade and then the mixed version of this, which is why I haven't asterisked it, but we'll see. Then we've got the phthalo green blue shade. Oh, and I didn't mention the phthalo blue green shade is Daniel Smith, and then the turquoise green is Holbein. And then we've got phthalo green blue shade. This one is I think it's Shinhan's, or it could be Daniel Smith. Both of them look very similar to me. Another classic green for me. I started out very early on using PG7 and I really like transparent colours. I also don't mind using very intensely saturated colours. So phthalos for me aren't a problem. I really love them. And then a kind of similar colour. Some people find these too similar to have both on the same palette. I find I actually like having both on my palette. So the other one here is PG18 Viridian, and this is True Viridian. And this one is by M. Graham. These 2 can have a very similar hue. They're very cool greens, but the phthalo green blue shade goes slightly more intense, and it can also reach a slightly darker value, as you can see. So we've got the phthalo up there and then the Viridian down there. The reason why I specify that this one is True Viridian, the PG18, is because some brands, especially Asian brands like Holbein, Shinhan, Mission Gold I think as well, will call this Viridian when it's not. That's just a problem with naming conventions not being standardized and things like that. True Viridian granulates. Phthalo green doesn't. Now, phthalos do sometimes do a thing called, what is it, fluctuation? Well, basically there's a thing with some phthalos where they can have texture to them, but it's different from granulation. That's a whole other discussion, but for the most part, phthalo green is non-granulating, and then Viridian is granulating. So for me, I find having both of them useful, because sometimes I do want a granulating green, and you can kind of see up here a little bit. It'll be easier to see on the scans that there is a little bit of green granulation in the True Viridian. And that takes us to the final green, which is Azo Green, which I absolutely adore. So that there is Azo Green. And this is a pigment that I fell in love with when I started using it. I didn't start using it this year. I can't remember when I started using it though, but it's within the last few years, and I adore Azo Green. It's also sometimes called green gold. It is actually a yellow pigment. It's PY129, and that is it there. It's a very yellow leaning green, and it looks more yellow depending on the pigments that it's surrounded by, again because colour theory, comparative colours and things like that. So sometimes you can actually get away with this looking yellow, and then other times you can get away with it looking very green. And one thing that I love about PY129 is that I can mix yellow from it by mixing this with a tiny bit of either PO62 or one of these oranges. So I can actually mix a yellow by mixing orange and a very yellow green together. And I'm going to do some colour mixing videos soon on how to like mix blue without blue, how to mix yellow without yellow and things like that. I know some of you have been asking for me to do that, so I'm planning on it. I am planning on it. You can kind of see some of the blues going on down here where like we have PV15 mixed with some of the greens. And again, if you use comparative colour theory, if I remove the actual blues, those blues under my fingers do start to look blue. So like if I cover it up. So where's the green? Boom. Where are we? PV there. So these here are mixed from purple and greens. And if you're using a limited colour palette where you don't actually have any blues, so like ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, etc., then these end up looking much more blue. And so you can mix blues. There's some here as well. And they actually end up looking blue when you're using limited palettes. So I'm going to talk about stuff like that in another video. Where was I? Right, yes, so I like mixing yellow using this sometimes, but I find it very useful skin tone mixing colour as well. It makes gorgeous skin tones across the board, depending on what other pigments you mix with it. And then we have the earth tones. So we have pretty much classics here. I didn't get too fancy with these. We've got yellow ochre, and this particular one is PY43 by Daniel Smith. Then we have quinacridone burnt orange, and this is PO48, and this one is also Daniel Smith. We've got PBR25, which is brown red in Shinhan, which is what I've used for a very long time, but this one's actually imidazolone brown. I have a really hard time pronouncing that because I finished my tube of the Shinhan recently, and so I restocked it by using the Holbein and trying that brand out for PBR25. I adore this as a transparent, non-granulating earth tone. Also mixes really gorgeous, deep skin tones, depending on what else you mix with it. Burnt sienna, this particular one is PBR7. I personally prefer my burnt siennas, burnt umbers and stuff to be PBR7s. And we have both burnt sienna and burnt umber here. Both of those by Daniel Smith, both of them PBR7. And so you can see some of the earth tones that they produce. They're just classics for me. I like to have a mixture of transparent, non-granulating options. So like these two here are transparent and non-granulating. Then I also like to have some granulating options. These are more granulating. And then the yellow ochre by Daniel Smith is my favourite yellow ochre. Anyone who loves the yellow ochre by Daniel Smith will know why it's my favorite. And then finally, to round it all off, we have Neutral Tint, and this one is by M. Graham, and it is PV19 mixed with PG7. So this is the only multi-pigment that I have on the palette. And the reason why I have that is because I like using it for value studies. I actually tend to use it on its own. So whenever I want to go and do a monochromatic value study, I'll almost always use this particular pigment. I don't often mix it with other things, though, as you can see, again, I'll cover some of it up so that you can see it a little bit more easily. But it's better if you look at the scan. It makes really, really interesting neutrals of different secondaries and primaries. And that covers the full mixing chart and the pigments. So again, we've got a mixture of classics in here for me, but then also plenty of new things. We've got pigments that I'm trying to experiment with in order to, we've got cat hair as well, classic. We've got pigments that I am experimenting with in order to try to find a replacement for a pigment that was on my main palette. So the oranges at Pit, both of them are new for me. And hopefully figure out which one I like the most. And then we have a classic, but then two new ones in order to see how I feel about PV19s and PR122. We have some new violets going on in here, a new classic for me, Peroline Violet. We've got a mixture of blues and that are classics, and also some rehomed, I know that's a violet as well, but some rehomed blues and new blues for me to play with. And then a lot of classic colours down here. So final thing I want to say, and I'll try to keep it relatively brief because this video is already going on for a while. Another cat hair. I keep this palette closed and somehow cat hair's getting it. So one thing that's happened is, let me grab it. Ooh, this was my expansion palette, as I said towards the start of this video. This is now my main palette. This is now my expansion palette. I bought a second one. So now this is taking the place of what this was doing. I'm not going to tour the whole thing. I just want to very briefly show you what's going on with it. This is where I store the rest of my watercolours. These were paints rehomed that someone sent me. These were from Gabor. Thank you for these. And this is all the rest of the watercolours I own. So all the watercolours I own are either here or they're in the main palette. And that is just so that I always have eyes on them, because I have a very, I've noticed that I tend to have a very out of sight, out of mind personality, brain, whatever you want to call it. And I've found that having just these two palettes and having all my paints in them means that I can just open both of them, and then when I'm planning paintings I have everything visible to me, and that just means I actually use everything I own rather than things being hidden in boxes and stuff like that. There's only one exception to a paint not being on my palette, and it is this one. This was also rehomed to me. This is Cobalt Violet by Winsor & Newton. This was also sent to me by Gabor, and the reason why this is not on any of my palettes is because this hardens to a rock. It just doesn't re-wet, so this has to be used fresh out of the tube in order to have a fun time. So what I'm going to basically do with it is it's going to have a spot, it's going to have a well in that expansion palette, but I'm only going to squeeze out as much as I need whenever I'm actually painting with it. And that's just because you won't re-wet. Why do you do this to me? So, one thing that I find very, very beneficial to me by having both of my palettes, my main and my expansion palette, being the same kind of palette, is that whenever I go to make a painting, the way I like to prepare for a painting is that I like to sit down and do colour studies, like little colour comps and things, and plan out the pigments that I want to use. And sometimes I'll want to do limited palettes, sometimes they're triads, sometimes I might do 4, 5, 6 pigments, sometimes more, but I do tend to like to explore how I can limit the gamut on my paintings in order to have an interesting time mixing. It's something that I find super fascinating, and so that is something that I like incorporating into my art practice to make it fun, exciting and interesting to me. And so what I can do is that when I'm doing a painting and I open both of my palettes out, which I won't do because space right now, I can go, right, okay, this particular painting I am wanting to focus on the cool section of the colour wheel, and so I'm going to do these, this, and this, and then I'll be like, right, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out this pigment from the expansion palette, and I'm going to pick out this, and this, and then I'll arrange them all. I can even just like bring them all out and be like, okay, so these are all the pigments I'm using, and then when I go to actually paint, this will be the palette that I'm mixing on. And what I can do is I can either bring paints out of the expansion palette and just rest them somewhere, or I can temporarily remove some of these and swap them out for the paints that I want to use for the limited palette for that one painting, and then swap them back again really quickly. And because this palette is the same as my expansion palette, I can just do that really, really easily. So that is why this has become my main palette now, and why I have the same kind as my expansion palette, and also a little brief explanation as to why I have an expansion and a main palette. I've done a more in-depth blog post and I think a video as well as to why I like having those two. And then this not expansion, I've been saying expansion a lot. This travel palette doesn't contain anything new. This just contains 6 colours that are already in these palettes. So there's nothing new or different in that one. I purely just have that as a very tiny, convenient size. And that is my watercolour collection. It's those 3 palettes. And I'm finding that this is working really, really well for me. Those of you who might be curious as to what happened to the palette I was using as my main palette towards the start of 2025, I rehomed that. What I did was, when I finally sat down sometime in autumn, I think it was, when I finally sat down and went, you know what, this is what's working for me, and I made this into my my main palette, and I made the new one. I bought that one and I made that into an expansion palette. Is I actually removed, I don't know if you can see, I removed the paints from the wells in the original main palette, which was a slanted well palette that you can't remove the wells from. I just removed all the paint, and that was one of them, this burnt umber, and slotted them into this palette. And then any paints that were a little bit more sticky ended up having to have a palette knife to bring it out. So that's why that's a mess, because that was put in with a palette knife transferred from the other palette. And then there were a couple paints that I didn't transfer over, and I gifted that palette to a neighbour to give to someone else. So I rehomed that palette. And I think rehoming paints and stuff to spread the joy is a really lovely way of, like I said, if an art supply is not working for you, it's a great way to make sure that it can spread some joy to someone else instead. And I think that kind of covers it. If you do have any questions, because this video is going on for a while now, If you do have any questions as to why I have done anything to do with this palette, would be that the pigments, the palette arrangement, the storage system, whatever, please let me know in the comments. I can either reply to you, or I can make it into a video if I feel like it needs a video as an explanation. I hope this was interesting, or an interesting look at how you can tailor something to fit you and your personality, your needs, and what works for you. This system is not going to work for everyone, and what I actually encourage is for you to go out and try and find within your means what works for you. I've got paint all over my fingers, haha. And through trading as well, it's a great way of being able to try new colours without spending as much, like the rehomed paints and things that I have in here. Finding art communities, networking and things like that, really, really great. And it's a great way of not spending too much money. For a few years now I have been on like no buy or low buy, like only restocking. And then this year I was in a place where I was just like, right, okay, I'm going to pick up some paints now, and I could feel I was really in a spot of wanting to expand and explore and things. And now I've reached a point where in 2026 I highly doubt that I am going to be picking up new paints that I don't already own. I'd probably only be restocking. I might trade, but I can't see myself, at least right now, buying any new pigments next year. There's plenty of slots still free in the expansion palette, but I have no desire to go out and like fill them just for the sake of filling them. I'm at a very happy spot with my collection right now, and I just want to get to using them and trying to figure out what I like out of multiple options in here. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!